There is a kind of pain that comes with a failing marriage that is very difficult to describe to people who have never experienced it. It is not the pain of a dramatic betrayal. It is not the pain of a sudden separation. It is not even the pain of a relationship that ends loudly with clear reasons and obvious closure. This pain is quieter. It grows slowly. It settles in over time. And because it does not announce itself with a single moment or event, many people do not realize what is happening until they are already deeply affected by it. In a failing marriage, love may still exist, commitment may still exist, daily life may still function. You may still share a home, raise children, attend events together, and present a united front to the outside world. From a distance, everything can look stable, but inside the marriage, peace is gone, emotional safety is gone, connection feels thin or strained, and the absence of peace begins to affect everything. One of the hardest parts of this kind of marriage is that it does not give you permission to grieve openly. Because the marriage technically still exists, you may feel like you are not allowed to name your pain. You may tell yourself that others have it worse. You may minimize what you are feeling because nothing big enough has happened to justify it, but emotional distance, chronic tension, and unresolved conflict take a serious toll over time. They wear a person down slowly. In these marriages, conversations often become careful instead of open. You learn which topics to avoid. You learn which words lead to arguments, defensiveness, or shutdown. You begin to filter yourself, not because you do not care, but because you care too much to keep hurting or being hurt. Over time, this self-editing becomes exhausting. You may start to feel like you are disappearing inside your own relationship. There is a particular loneliness that exists only inside marriage. It is the loneliness of being physically close, but emotionally far apart. You are not alone in a room, yet you feel unseen. You are sharing life with someone, yet you feel like you are carrying your inner world by yourself. This loneliness can be deeply confusing, especially when you still love your spouse or feel committed to the marriage. At night, when the house is quiet, the questions tend to surface. How did we get here? When did things change? Why does this feel so hard now? You may replay moments from earlier years, trying to pinpoint when the connection began to fade. You may remember seasons when communication felt easy, when laughter came naturally, when affection was unforced, and you may wonder if those versions of your marriage are gone for good. Many people in failing marriages carry a quiet sense of guilt. They feel guilty for being unhappy, guilty for wanting more, guilty for feeling lonely when they are still married. They may wonder if their expectations are unrealistic or if they are simply ungrateful. Over time, this guilt can silence them. They stop voicing their needs. They stop naming what hurts. They tell themselves to endure rather than to understand. This kind of endurance can look admirable on the outside, but it can be very costly on the inside. When pain is ignored for too long, it does not disappear. It goes underground. It shows up as resentment, emotional numbness, fatigue, or quiet despair. It can affect mental health, physical health, and spiritual life. Many people in failing marriages find themselves praying differently, not bold prayers for restoration, but quiet prayers for survival. They may pray for patience, for wisdom, for strength to get through the day without becoming bitter or hardened. They may ask God questions they never expected to ask. Does God see what is happening inside my marriage? Does He understand how lonely this feels? Is He asking me to stay silent, or is there something else He wants me to see? The Bible does not ignore these kinds of situations. Scripture contains stories of people who lived inside difficult, complicated relationships and had to navigate them with wisdom rather than ideal circumstances. One of the most relevant stories for understanding a failing marriage is the story of Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25. To understand why her story matters, it is important to understand her situation clearly. Abigail was married to a man named Nabal. Scripture describes Nabal as harsh, foolish, and difficult. He was wealthy and powerful, but his character was deeply flawed. He was arrogant, dismissive, and reckless in his behavior. Abigail, by contrast, is described as intelligent, discerning, and wise. She was married to someone who did not share her values, her judgment, or her sense of responsibility. This was not a peaceful marriage. Abigail lived in a household shaped by her husband's poor decisions. She did not have the option to simply leave. In her cultural context, marriage was binding, and her safety and survival were tied to her husband's household. She had to live carefully, using wisdom and restraint in a situation she did not choose. At one point, Nabal's behavior put their entire household in danger. David, who would later become king, had protected Nabal's shepherds and property. When David asked for provisions in return, Nabal responded with insult and arrogance. His refusal was not just rude, it was dangerous. It threatened retaliation that could have destroyed everything Abigail depended on. When Abigail learned what her husband had done, she immediately understood the consequences. Without telling Nabal, she acted. She gathered food and supplies and went out to meet David herself. She spoke with humility, wisdom, and courage. She took responsibility for a situation she did not create. Her actions prevented bloodshed and saved lives. What is striking about Abigail's story is not that her marriage suddenly became healthy. Nabal did not change. He remained harsh and foolish. But God saw Abigail. God honored her wisdom. God protected her. And in time, God removed her from a situation that could not sustain life. Abigail's story shows us that God is present even when marriages are deeply strained. For those living in failing marriages today, this matters. It tells us that God does not only see ideal marriages, He sees complicated ones. He sees the emotional labor that goes unseen. He sees the restraint it takes to live with wisdom when communication is broken. He sees the pain of being married to someone who does not listen, understand, or change. A failing marriage often teaches people how to be quiet in ways they never expected. You may stop sharing certain thoughts because they are always misunderstood. You may stop expressing certain emotions because they are dismissed or minimized. Over time, you may feel like you are shrinking to fit the relationship rather than growing within it. This kind of shrinking can lead to emotional numbness. You still function, you still fulfill responsibilities, but you feel less alive, less connected to yourself, less hopeful about the future. You may feel like your life is on pause, waiting for something to change, without knowing what that change should be. It is important to say this clearly. Struggling in your marriage does not mean you are failing God. Feeling tired does not mean you lack faith. Naming your pain does not make you disloyal. God does not require silence as proof of faithfulness. He does not ask you to pretend that everything is fine when it is not. Faith in a failing marriage often looks different than we expect. It does not look like certainty. It does not look like easy forgiveness or quick resolution. Often, it looks like wisdom. It looks like discernment. It looks like choosing not to harden your heart, even when your heart has been hurt repeatedly. Sometimes hope in a failing marriage does not mean immediate reconciliation. Sometimes hope means clarity. Sometimes it means God strengthening you internally, even if the external situation remains unchanged for a time. Sometimes hope is simply knowing that God sees you and is not asking you to carry everything alone. Abigail's story also reminds us that God can work through you, not just around you. Even when your spouse does not change, God can give you wisdom, protection, and direction. Your life is not wasted because your marriage is struggling. Your calling is not suspended because your relationship is difficult. If you are in a marriage where love still exists but peace is gone, you are not imagining it. Emotional distance is real. Chronic tension is real. Loneliness inside commitment is real. And God is not offended by your honesty about it. There may come a time when God brings resolution, whether through healing, clarity, or change. But until then, God's presence is not conditional on outcomes. He is with you in the waiting, in the confusion, and in the quiet grief of unmet expectations. Let this settle for a moment. You are not invisible. Your pain matters. Your faithfulness is seen. And your story is not defined by the hardest chapter you are currently living. This is Life with Joy, a space for honest faith, thoughtful reflection, and room to breathe. You do not need to have answers to belong here. You do not need to pretend everything is fine. We are not in a rush. We walk together, trusting that God sees what others may never fully understand. God bless you.